The Galactic Concord had watched Earth for almost 100 years before they decided to make contact. They sent probes. They recorded radio signals. They studied the small blue planet from the safety of deep space, and when they finished their research, they wrote a simple report. Humans were weak. Humans were primitive. Humans were no threat to anyone. The aliens of the Concord had seen many species rise and fall across the galaxy. They had watched empires grow and crumble. They had learned to measure the strength of a civilization by its technology, its military power, and its physical abilities. By all these measures, humans scored poorly. Their bodies were soft. Their lives were short. Their ships were slow and clumsy, compared to the sleek vessels of older races. So when the Velthari Dominion asked permission to take control of the Sol system, the Concord did not object. The Velthari were conquerors. They had built their empire by enslaving weaker species and stripping their worlds of resources. It was ugly work, but the Concord looked away. After all, the humans would probably surrender without a fight. That was what weak species did. The Velthari arrived at New Haven on a cold morning in March. New Haven was humanity's first colony outside the solar system. It was a farming world, green and peaceful, home to 12,000 settlers who had left Earth, seeking a quiet life among the stars. They grew crops in alien soil. They raised families under an unfamiliar sun. They believed they were safe. The first sign of trouble came when the communication satellites went dark. Danny Cruz, commander of the colony ship Wanderer, was 3 days away when he picked up the distress signal. The transmission was broken and full of static. He could hear screaming. He could hear weapons firing. And then he heard a voice he recognized. It belonged to Maria Ortiz, and she was shouting orders like she had never left the Marines. Maria was 62 years old. She had retired from military service 15 years ago. After the Pacific conflicts left her with nightmares she could not escape. She came to New Haven to farm. She wanted to grow vegetables and watch sunsets and forget the things she had seen and done. But old soldiers never truly forget. When the Velthari dropships appeared in the sky, something woke up inside her. Something cold and sharp and very, very angry. The Velthari expected no resistance. Their intelligence reports said the colony had no military presence. Just farmers. Just civilians. They landed their troops in the main settlement and began rounding up the population. Their commander broadcast a message in broken English. "Surrender," he said. "Cooperate, and you will not be harmed. Resist, and you will be destroyed." Maria heard the message from her farmhouse on the edge of town. She looked at her neighbors, huddled together in fear. She looked at the children crying in their mother's arms. And she made a decision that would change the course of history. She gathered every weapon she could find: hunting rifles, shotguns, kitchen knives. She found the other veterans in the colony, men and women who had served in Earth's many wars. There were only 19 of them, 19 against 500 Velthari soldiers. The odds were impossible. Maria did not care about odds. She cared about the families hiding in basements. She cared about the children who deserved a chance to grow up. She looked at her small band of fighters and spoke in a voice that carried no doubt. "We hold them here," she said. "We hold them until help arrives. And if help doesn't come, we make them pay for every inch of ground." The Velthari had never faced an enemy like this. They were used to conquering species that surrendered at the first show of force. They did not understand guerrilla warfare. They did not understand ambushes. They did not understand that a human with a rifle and knowledge of the terrain could be more dangerous than a dozen soldiers in open combat. Maria led her people into the hills. They struck at night, hitting supply convoys and disappearing before the Velthari could respond. They set traps using farming equipment and mining explosives. They turned the peaceful colony into a killing ground. The Velthari commander grew frustrated. He sent patrol after patrol into the wilderness. Few came back. Those who survived reported strange things. The humans did not fight like soldiers. They fought like ghosts. They were everywhere and nowhere. They seemed to know every rock, every tree, every shadow. On the third day, Maria led an assault on a Velthari walker. The massive war machine stood 3 stories tall, bristling with weapons. It should have been invincible against a handful of farmers with rifles, but Maria had studied the Velthari technology. She knew their walkers had a weakness in the leg joints. She sent 2 teams to distract the machine while she crawled through the mud with a bag of explosives. The walker fell with a sound like thunder. Maria was thrown clear by the blast, her leg broken in 3 places. She dragged herself to cover and kept fighting. When Danny Cruz finally broke through the Velthari blockade on the 6th day, he expected to find ruins. He expected to find bodies. Instead, he found Maria Ortiz standing in the wreckage of the Velthari command post, covered in alien blood, her broken legs splinted with pieces of farming equipment. Around her stood the survivors of New Haven. They were battered and exhausted, but they were alive, and they had won. The Velthari commander sent a confused report back to his superiors. He could not explain what had happened. The humans were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to surrender. Instead, they had fought with a ferocity that defied all logic. They had turned a simple conquest into a disaster. Danny helped Maria onto a stretcher. But she grabbed his arm before the medics could take her away. "Tell Earth," she said, her voice rough with pain and exhaustion. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them we are not as weak as they think." Danny looked at the burning Velthari ships, at the bodies of alien soldiers scattered across the colony, at the ragged group of farmers who had done the impossible. He nodded slowly. "I'll tell them," he promised. "I'll tell everyone." And he did. The story of New Haven spread across human space like fire. It reached every colony, every station, every ship. It reached the ears of soldiers who had put down their weapons and tried to forget how to fight, and it woke something in them, something the galaxy was not prepared for. The Velthari had come to conquer a weak species. They had found something else entirely. They had found humanity. And humanity was just getting started. The news from New Haven traveled fast. It moved through radio waves and data streams. It passed from ship to ship, station to station, world to world. Within a week, every human in the galaxy knew what had happened. A handful of farmers had stood against an alien army. And they had won. Earth's governments held emergency meetings. They argued about responses and strategies and diplomatic options. They sent formal protests to the Galactic Concord. They demanded action. But while the politicians talked, something else was happening. Something quieter. Something far more dangerous. Jack Harrison heard the news in his bar on Ceres. He owned a small place near the mining docks, the kind of bar where workers came to drink and forget their troubles. Jack poured drinks and wiped glasses and pretended he was just an old man living out his final years in peace. But his hands shook when he worked. They had shaken ever since Titan. The siege of Titan had lasted 8 months. Jack had been a sergeant in the Space Defense Force, commanding a squad of vacuum fighters. He had watched his friends die in the cold silence of space. He had killed enemies so close he could see their faces through their helmets. When the war ended, he was given medals and called a hero. He threw the medals in a drawer and never looked at them again. Now he stood behind his bar, watching the news feed, and felt something stirring in his chest. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was something older and darker. It was the part of him that had learned to kill and never quite forgotten how. The door opened. A woman walked in. She was about his age, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much. She wore civilian clothes, but Jack recognized the way she moved. It was the walk of someone who had spent years in uniform. "Jack Harrison," she said. It was not a question. "Linda Shaw," he replied. He remembered her from the old days. Naval intelligence. The kind of person who knew secrets that could start wars. Linda sat at the bar and slid a data chip across the counter. 12 colonies hit in the last month. The Velthari think we're easy targets. They're wrong, but they don't know it yet. Jack looked at the chip but did not touch it. "I'm retired. I run a bar now." "You were never retired, Jack. You just took a long break." Linda leaned forward. Maria Ortiz held New Haven with 19 people and farming equipment. Imagine what we could do with real soldiers. With people who remember how to fight. Jack's hands had stopped shaking. He noticed that with a distant kind of surprise. "What are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to remember who you are. I'm asking you to help me find others like us. Veterans. Survivors. People the galaxy wrote off as broken and useless." Linda's voice was calm, but her eyes burned with cold fire. "The Velthari made a mistake coming here. Let's show them how big a mistake it was." Jack picked up the data chip. He turned it over in his fingers. He thought about Titan. He thought about the friends he had buried. He thought about the nightmares that still woke him at 3 in the morning. Then he thought about New Haven. About Maria Ortiz standing in the ruins with a broken leg, refusing to fall. About the children she had saved. "Where do we start?" he asked. They started everywhere. Linda had contacts across human space, people she had worked with during her years in intelligence. She knew where the veterans had gone to hide from their memories. She knew who was still capable of fighting and who had truly given up. On Mars, they found Kevin Price. He had been an Army Ranger, one of the best. He had led raids on enemy positions that military historians still studied. Now he drove cargo haulers across the Red Desert, moving supplies between mining outposts. It was boring work. But boring was what Kevin wanted. Boring meant no one was trying to kill him. When Jack and Linda showed up at his apartment, Kevin listened to their pitch in silence. Then he walked to his closet and pulled out a bag he had not opened in 10 years. Inside was his old combat gear, carefully maintained despite the years of neglect. "I always knew I'd need this again," he said quietly. "Part of me was hoping I was wrong." On Luna, they found Amanda Ross. She had been a fighter pilot during the Belt Wars, famous for impossible maneuvers that left enemy ships spinning into asteroids. She ran a flight school now, teaching young pilots how to handle ships in zero gravity. She was good at it. But there was a restlessness in her that her students sometimes noticed. A hunger for something more than training exercises. Amanda did not need convincing. She had seen the footage from New Haven. She had watched Maria Ortiz give her interview from a hospital bed, still giving orders to the nurses like they were soldiers under her command. Amanda had laughed and cried at the same time. "I've been waiting for this," she told Linda. "I've been waiting for a reason to fly again." A real reason. The network grew. Dozens of veterans, scattered across human space, all answering the same call. They were old and tired and broken in various ways. They carried scars on their bodies and their minds, but they also carried something else. Skills, experience, knowledge that could not be learned from books or simulations. They knew how to fight. And more importantly, they knew how to win. Danny Cruz became their link to the official military. He was not a veteran himself, just a cargo ship commander who had stumbled into a war. But he had connections. He had access, and he believed in what they were doing. Maria Ortiz, still recovering from her injuries, became their symbol. Her face was everywhere now. The woman who had stood against the Velthari and refused to break. Young soldiers looked at her picture and found courage they did not know they had. The Velthari continued their attacks on the outer colonies. They burned settlements and took prisoners. They thought they were winning. They did not understand that every atrocity they committed was adding fuel to a fire that would soon consume them. In a secure facility on Earth, Jack Harrison stood before a room full of veterans, men and women who had fought in wars across the solar system. Soldiers who had been told their fighting days were over. "The galaxy thinks we're finished," Jack said. His voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the room. "They think we're too old, too broken, too human to matter. They're wrong. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years. We've turned war into an art form, and now someone else wants to play." He paused, looking at the faces before him. He saw fear there, and pain, and exhaustion. But he also saw something else. Something that had never quite died, no matter how hard they tried to bury it. "So let's show them what we can do. Let's remind the galaxy why they should have left us alone." The room was silent for a moment. Then Kevin Price stood up, then Amanda Ross. Then, one by one, every veteran in the room rose to their feet. The Velthari had awakened something they did not understand. A generation of warriors who had tried to find peace, who had tried to forget, who had hoped their fighting days were over. They were wrong. And the galaxy would never be the same. The Velthari Dominion had conquered 47 worlds before they came to human space. They had a system that worked. First, they would arrive with overwhelming force. Then, they would execute any leaders who resisted. Finally, they would enslave the survivors and strip the planet of resources. It was simple. It was efficient. It had never failed. On Kepler's Reach, the system failed. Kepler's Reach was a mining world, rich in rare metals that powered starship engines. The Velthari wanted those metals badly. They sent a garrison of 500 soldiers to secure the planet. They expected the human miners to surrender immediately. Mining colonies had no armies. They had no weapons. They were just workers, far from home, trying to earn a living. Kevin Price arrived 2 days before the Velthari. He brought 30 veterans with him, 30 against 500. The math was terrible. But Kevin had learned long ago that wars were not won by math. He gathered the miners in the main cafeteria and explained the situation. The Velthari were coming. They would kill anyone who resisted. They would enslave the rest. The miners could surrender and hope for mercy, or they could fight. "I won't lie to you," Kevin said. "Fighting will be hard. Some of us will die. But surrender means giving up everything. Your homes, your freedom, your future. I know which choice I'm making. The rest is up to you." Every single miner chose to fight. Kevin did not waste time. He put the miners to work preparing the colony for war. They blocked tunnels. They set traps. They turned the mining equipment into weapons. Drilling lasers became defensive turrets. Excavation charges became bombs. The massive hauling vehicles became armored transports. When the Velthari landed, they found an empty settlement. The humans had vanished into the mine shafts beneath the surface. The alien commander ordered his troops to pursue. It was a mistake he would not live to regret. The mines of Kepler's Reach were a maze. Miles of tunnels, carved through rock over decades of work. The miners knew every passage, every shortcut, every dead end. The Velthari knew nothing. They marched into the darkness, confident in their superior numbers, and found only death. Kevin's team struck from the shadows. They hit the rear of enemy patrols and vanished before the Velthari could respond. They collapsed tunnels on advancing troops. They poisoned water supplies with chemicals that were harmless to humans but deadly to Velthari biology. Day after day, the alien garrison grew smaller. Above the planet, Amanda Ross was fighting a different kind of war. Her squadron had no warships, just cargo vessels and mining transports. They were slow, ugly, and built for hauling rocks, not fighting. The Velthari laughed when they saw them on their sensors. Amanda let them laugh. Then she showed them what a cargo ship could do in the hands of someone who had spent 20 years fighting in asteroid belts. She used the debris field around Kepler's Reach as cover. The asteroids were thick here, the remains of ancient collisions that filled local space with tumbling rocks. Most pilots avoided debris fields. Amanda danced through them like she was born there. Her ships would appear from behind asteroids, launch their weapons, and disappear before the Velthari could target them. The weapons were not military grade. They were mining charges, designed to break apart rocks, repurposed as missiles. They were not elegant, but they worked. One by one, the Velthari supply ships fell. Cut off from reinforcements. The garrison on the surface began to starve. The Galactic Concord observed these events with growing concern. They had expected the human conflict to be brief, a minor species resisting a major power. It happened sometimes. It never lasted long. But the humans were not behaving like a minor species. They were fighting with creativity and fury that the Concord had rarely seen. Linda Shaw intercepted a Velthari command transmission and brought it to the War Council. She had spent days translating the alien language. What she found made her smile. "Their commander is terrified," she reported. "He says the humans don't fight with honor. They don't face the Velthari in open battle. They hide in the dark. They strike without warning. They vanish like ghosts. She looked at the faces around the table. He's asking for permission to retreat. Maria Ortiz leaned forward in her chair. She was walking with a cane now, her legs still healing. But her eyes were sharp as ever. Did they give him permission? No. High Command told him to hold his position. They're sending reinforcements. Good. Maria's smile was cold. More targets. The reinforcements arrived 3 weeks later. 2,000 fresh soldiers, determined to crush the human resistance. They found a colony that had become a fortress. Every approach was mined. Every building was a strong point. The humans had dug trenches and built bunkers and prepared kill zones that would have made any military engineer proud. Kevin Price watched the Velthari advance through his binoculars. He felt nothing. No fear. No excitement. Just the cold focus that had kept him alive through a dozen wars. They're coming in heavy, one of his veterans reported. Looks like they brought walkers this time. I see them. Kevin studied the massive war machines. He had fought walkers before. He knew their weaknesses. Tell the miners to fall back to position 3. Let the Velthari think they're winning. Then, spring the trap. The battle lasted 4 days. The Velthari pushed forward, taking ground inch by inch. They paid for every meter with blood, and when they finally reached the center of the colony, exhausted and depleted, they found themselves surrounded. The humans had let them in. Now they would not let them out. When the shooting stopped, the Velthari garrison had ceased to exist. 2,000 soldiers, the pride of the Dominion, wiped out by miners and old veterans with improvised weapons. The news spread across the galaxy. The Concord species whispered about the humans who fought like demons. The Velthari High Command ordered a full review of their strategy, and, in a dozen systems, oppressed species who had long accepted Velthari rule began to wonder if resistance was possible after all. Danny Cruz received a message from an alien source. The Kathrani, a trading species the Velthari had exploited for generations, wanted to talk. They had information to share. Shipping routes, garrison locations, weaknesses in the Velthari supply chain. Why are you helping us? Danny asked their representative. The Kathrani looked at him with eyes that had seen centuries of oppression. Because you showed us something we had forgotten. That the strong are not always invincible. That the weak can fight back. That empires can fall. The war was changing. What started as a simple conquest had become something else entirely. The Velthari had come to enslave humanity. Instead, they had started a revolution, and humanity was just getting started. 6 months had passed since the Velthari first attacked New Haven. 6 months of blood and fire and desperate fighting, and now, for the first time, the invaders were losing. The Velthari Dominion had expected a quick victory. They had planned for a few weeks of conquest, followed by decades of peaceful exploitation. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a war that grew worse every day. Their supply lines were shattered, their soldiers were exhausted and afraid. Morale had collapsed among troops who had never known defeat. The Galactic Concord watched with a mixture of fear and fascination. They had never seen anything like this. A minor species, barely capable of interstellar travel, was fighting one of the galaxy's great powers to a standstill. Some Concord members began to reconsider their assessment of humanity. Others began to see opportunity. The Kathrani were the first to openly support the human resistance. They were traitors, not warriors. The Velthari had extorted them for centuries, taking tribute and threatening destruction. Now they saw a chance to break free. They sent supply ships loaded with food, medicine, and intelligence data. They shared everything they knew about Velthari weaknesses. The Morvacs came next. They had been slaves once. Their entire species conquered and brutalized by the Dominion. A few had escaped, building small colonies on the edges of known space. They remembered what it felt like to be helpless. They remembered what it felt like to resist. When they heard about the humans, they sent weapons and advisors to help. Danny Cruz found himself coordinating not just human forces, but an alliance of species united by one thing: hatred of the Velthari. He had never wanted this role. He was a cargo ship commander, not a military leader. But the universe did not care what he wanted, it only cared what he could do. "We need a decisive victory," Linda Shaw told him during a strategy meeting. "Something big enough to break their will to fight. Something that shows the galaxy we can win." "Proxima Station," Jack Harrison said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. "They'll hit Proxima Station. It's our largest military installation. If they take it, they control the inner systems. They have to try." Linda nodded slowly. "Intelligence suggests they're massing their fleet. 60 warships. 15,000 ground troops. Everything they have left in human space. Then that's where we fight." Jack's voice was calm, but his eyes burned with cold determination. "We let them come to us. We let them think they're winning, and then we destroy them." Admiral Catherine Blake, the highest-ranking officer in human space, listened to Jack's plan with growing disbelief. It was insane. It was suicidal. It required letting the Velthari board Proxima Station, giving up the advantages of space combat to fight room by room in the station's corridors. "You want us to let them inside?" she demanded. "Do you understand what you're asking?" "I understand perfectly." Jack met her gaze without flinching. "The Velthari are stronger than us in space combat. Their ships are faster. Their weapons more powerful. In open battle, we lose. But in close quarters? Corridor by corridor? That's where their advantages disappear. That's where their size becomes a weakness. That's where we win." The Admiral was silent for a long moment. She looked at the other veterans in the room: Kevin Price, Amanda Ross, Maria Ortiz, leaning on her cane but refusing to sit down. Men and women who had fought humanity's wars for decades. Who knew things about combat that could not be learned from books. "All right," she said finally. "We do it your way. God help us all." The Velthari fleet arrived 3 weeks later. 60 warships, bristling with weapons, confident of victory. They swept aside the human defense perimeter and surrounded Proxima Station. Their commander broadcast a demand for surrender. He promised mercy for those who gave up peacefully. No one surrendered. The Velthari began their assault with orbital bombardment. They pounded the station's defenses for hours, destroying weapon platforms and breaching the outer hull. Then they sent their troops. 15,000 soldiers poured into Proxima Station. They moved through the corridors in tight formations, expecting to overwhelm the defenders with sheer numbers. Instead, they found a nightmare. Every hallway had become a kill zone. The humans had barricaded intersections and set up overlapping fields of fire. They had cut holes in walls to create hidden passages. They had rigged doors to explode and ceilings to collapse. The station that the Velthari thought they were conquering had become a death trap. Maria Ortiz commanded the defense of Section 7. She was 63 years old. Her leg had never fully healed. She should have been in a hospital bed. Instead, she stood at the front line, rifle in hand, leading her troops into battle. "Hold this position," she ordered. "They don't get past us." Not one step. The fighting was brutal. The Velthari pushed forward, taking casualties that would have broken any other army. But every time they advanced, they found new defenses, new traps, new horrors waiting in the darkness. Outside the station, Amanda Ross executed the second phase of the plan. While the Velthari fleet focused on the boarding action, her squadron struck from behind. They had been hiding in the asteroid belt, engines cold, waiting for the perfect moment. Now they attacked. Mining charges tore through Velthari hull plating. Cargo ships rammed into engine nacelles. It was not elegant warfare. It was chaos and desperation and raw human fury. And it worked. One by one, the Velthari ships began to die. Cut off from their fleet, the troops inside the station realized they were trapped. There would be no reinforcements. There would be no retreat. They had walked into a cage, and the door had slammed shut behind them. The Battle of Proxima Station lasted 9 days. 9 days of constant fighting, of corridors choked with bodies, of desperate last stands and impossible victories. When it finally ended, 60% of the Velthari invasion force had been destroyed. Maria Ortiz personally captured the enemy commander. She found him hiding in a storage room, his armor damaged, his bodyguards dead around him. He looked at her with eyes full of confusion and fear. "What are you?" he asked, his translator rendering the words in flat English. Maria leaned close. Her face was scarred from shrapnel. Her uniform was soaked with blood, some of it her own. She smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "We're what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness," she said. "We're humanity, and you should have left us alone." News of the victory spread across the galaxy. The Velthari Dominion, undefeated for centuries, had been broken by the species they had dismissed as primitive. The Concord species watched in amazement. The oppressed peoples of a dozen worlds began to dream of freedom, and in the wreckage of Proxima Station, surrounded by the bodies of her enemies, Maria Ortiz allowed herself a moment of hope. The tide had turned. The war was not over, but for the first time, she believed they could win. Humanity had shown the galaxy what it could do. Now it was time to finish the job. The Velthari Dominion asked for peace 8 months after their invasion began. Their request came not with pride, but with desperation. Their fleets were broken. Their armies were scattered. Their empire, which had seemed invincible, was crumbling from within. Linda Shaw led the human delegation at the peace talks. She sat across the table from the Velthari High Council and made demands that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Full withdrawal from human space, compensation for every colony destroyed, release of all prisoners taken during the war, and formal recognition of humanity as a sovereign power in the galaxy. The Velthari had no choice but to agree. They had come to enslave a weak species. They left with nothing but shame and the knowledge that they had awakened something they could not defeat. The Galactic Concord watched the treaty signing with a mixture of respect and fear. For centuries, they had maintained peace by allowing the strong to dominate the weak. The Velthari conquered. The smaller species submitted. It was the natural order of things. Now that order had been shattered by a species that refused to play by the rules. Ambassador Danny Cruz addressed the Concord Assembly 3 days after the peace treaty was signed. He had never wanted this job. He was a cargo ship commander who had stumbled into a war and somehow emerged as a leader. But the universe had chosen him, and he would not turn away from his duty. The assembly hall was vast, filled with representatives from dozens of species. Some were tall and elegant. Others were small and strange. All of them watched the human with curious eyes, wondering what kind of creature could do what humanity had done. Danny stepped to the podium and looked out at the gathered aliens. He felt small and tired and very, very human. But he also felt something else. Pride. Not for himself, but for his species. For the farmers who had fought on New Haven. For the veterans who had answered the call. For everyone who had refused to surrender when the odds said they should. "You looked at us and saw a young species," he began. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the hall. Small, fragile, primitive. You measured us by our technology and our military power, and found us lacking. You thought we would be easy to conquer. Easy to enslave. Easy to break. Easy to break. He paused, letting his words settle into the silence. You didn't see our history. You didn't see the wars we fought against each other. The horrors we survived. The lessons we learned in blood. We came to the stars hoping to leave that behind. We wanted peace. We built farms and schools and hospitals. We raised families under alien suns. We tried to be better than we had been. Danny's voice grew harder. But we never forgot how to fight. We never lost the instincts that kept us alive through thousands of years of war. And when the Velthari came, when they burned our colonies and enslaved our people, those instincts woke up. He looked directly at the Velthari representatives, who sat in shameful silence. We are not your enemies. We never wanted to be warriors. But make no mistake. We will protect our own. We will defend our homes. And anyone who threatens humanity will learn what we are capable of. The hall was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, a sound began to rise. It started with the Kethrani, who stamped their feet in their species' gesture of respect. The Morvax joined them, clicking their mandibles in approval. One by one, other species added their voices, until the hall echoed with the strange music of alien applause. In the years that followed, humanity became something no one had predicted. They did not build an empire. They did not conquer their neighbors. Instead, they became protectors. When the Kethrani faced raiders who preyed on their trading ships, human veterans volunteered to train their defense forces. They taught the peaceful traders how to fight back, how to protect themselves, how to turn weakness into strength. The raids stopped within a year. When the Morvax suffered a famine after a crop plague destroyed their harvest, human agricultural ships arrived with food and seeds and farming equipment. They asked nothing in return. They simply helped, because helping was the right thing to do. The species that had been dismissed as primitive became known throughout the galaxy as something far more complex. Fierce when provoked, but generous in peace. Dangerous enemies, but loyal friends. Warriors who hated war but would never run from it. The veterans returned to their lives, carrying new scars alongside old ones. Jack Harrison went back to his bar on Ceres. His hands still shook sometimes. But now the shaking felt earned. He had done terrible things during the war. He had also saved lives and protected the innocent. He could live with that. Amanda Ross started a new flight school. This time, her students came from a dozen species. Young pilots who wanted to learn from the woman who had defeated the Velthari fleet with cargo ships and mining charges. She taught them everything she knew, and they carried her lessons across the galaxy. Kevin Price wrote a book about the war. It became required reading at military academies throughout the Concord. His chapters on guerrilla tactics and improvised warfare changed how species thought about conflict. The weak, he argued, were never truly powerless. They just needed to find the right way to fight. Maria Ortiz refused every medal and promotion offered to her. She had never wanted glory. She had only wanted to protect the people she loved. When the war ended, she returned to New Haven, to the colony where everything had started. The settlement had been rebuilt. New houses stood where the old ones had burned. Children played in streets that had once run with blood. Farmers worked fields that had been battlegrounds. Life had returned to the world the Velthari had tried to destroy. Maria built a small house on the edge of town, near the site where she had made her first stand. She planted a garden there, growing flowers in soil that had once been soaked with alien blood. It was quiet work, peaceful work, the kind of work she had always wanted. A young journalist came to interview her one day. She wanted to know why Maria had chosen to return here, to this place of painful memories. Maria sat in her garden, looking at the alien sunset. The sky was painted in colors that Earth had never known. Purple and gold and a shade of pink that did not have a name in any human language. It was beautiful in a way that still surprised her, even after all these years. Because this is what we were fighting for, she said finally. Not glory. Not revenge. Just the chance to grow something beautiful. To build a future for our children. To live in peace. She smiled, and for a moment, the old soldier looked almost content. That's what they never understood about us. We don't fight because we love war. We fight because we love everything war would take from us. Our homes, our families, our freedom, our hope. Maria looked at the flowers blooming in her garden, bright against the alien soil. And now the war is over. Now we can finally rest. Now we can finally grow. Above her, the stars were coming out. Thousands of points of light, each one a sun with worlds of its own. A galaxy full of life and wonder and possibility. A galaxy that would never again underestimate the small, fragile species called humanity. The veterans had answered the call. They had fought the impossible war and won. And now, at last, they could find the peace they had earned, not because they were weak, but because they were strong enough to put down their weapons and choose something better. That was humanity's greatest victory. Not the battles they won, but the future they built afterward. A future worth fighting for.